We are back with our roundtable discussion. Joining me now, host of CNBC's Mad Money, Jim Cramer, NBC's special correspondent, Tom Brokaw, former Democratic governor of Michigan, Jennifer Granholm, and Republican Congressman of Idaho, Raul Labrador. Welcome to all of you. Jim Cramer, I want to start with you. I've talked to top bankers in the country who say there's Washington gridlock and there's Wall Street meltdown. They're preparing for the latter. This is a tough day right now. This is a code red day for many on Wall Street. Describe it.
Well, I think a lot of people are trying to figure out where bills will be paid. A lot of people are trying to figure out what cash is. In other words, there's so much money due. The government owes so much money in the next few days that the banks are wondering who will pay it. Will there be a total shutdown? Will the president have to order money be printed? Will gold be sold at Fort Knox? The range of worry is so staggering that all the great bankers and many of the great CEOs I deal with just simply have no idea what we're going to happen.
And if we don't have some kind of framework today that's announced, what could happen in Asia, what could happen in U.S. markets by tomorrow?
We have to go lower. It's just etched in the cards. We felt, by the way, on Friday that there might be a deal this weekend. That kept us from going down 2 to 3%. It is in the cards, 2 to 3%, maybe further if nothing is reached. This is global. Global.
Tom Brokaw, the cover of the National Journal was pretty scary this week. This is what it looks like. Damage done. This is a financial calamity, potentially. This is also a political meltdown. Where are we as we sit here now?
Well, I think this is much more than an accounting or a Wall Street issue. In fact, this is a critical passage for this country. It reminds me of my freshman year in college. I'd wait till the last minute, pull an all-nighter, and then go in there and hope I got it right. And I've got to tell you, my freshman year in college was a disaster. So I don't want that to be a metaphor for the country. But I'm not very confident about where we are right now because there is a political default that is already in place, not just in this country, with most of the constituents, left, right, and in the middle, saying they're so fed up with what's going on in Washington and no longer have confidence in the system. And then you expand that across the world. When there was a rumor that Greece, a bit player in the international economy, might default, look what happened to the markets and what happened around the world, because everything now travels at the speed of light. So this is a sad commentary on our system and our inability to manage the greatest country in the world and its place in the international economy, I think.
Raul Labrador, you're a freshman Republican from Idaho, Tea Party backed. A lot of your, and you've been instrumental in some of the talks on the House side, which included a balanced budget amendment, which is, a poison pill in the Senate, as you know. Do you feel vindicated that you've stuck to principles, or are you aptly criticized for failing to recognize what you and your colleagues are doing that leads to the political default that Tom is talking about?
Well, let's talk about this for a second. We didn't create the problem. The problem has been created by the establishment of Washington for the last 30 years. The reason we have $15 trillion in debt is not because I was in Congress for the last 30 years, because of the people who have been here. And we came to Washington to change the way business was done. The American people have told us that they wanted to change the way the business was done. Mike Mullen, who you quoted recently, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he said that the greatest national security threat to our nation is our debt.
But we know this about the backdrop. We understand the backdrop.
So
but there's still a question of how you unwind something so big when there is a real prospect here of financial calamity.
And I understand that. And if you look at what happened last night and this morning, John Boehner has been saying this entire week that the bill he first introduced in the House of Representatives was actually a bill that was supported by Harry Reid. Harry Reid has been denying it the whole week. He has been not telling the truth the entire week, saying that that was not the bill he agreed to. Then this morning we find out that the only difference between Harry Reid and John Boehner was the triggers. That's the only thing, the only distinction. So now we know that John Boehner has been telling the truth the entire week. The bill that he first introduced in the House was the bill that he and Harry Reid worked on last week. If he would have had enough Democrats who would have voted with John Boehner, this would have passed on Monday, and we wouldn't be at the moment of crisis that we're in right now.
Governor Granholm, what in the end? The senators are a little bit more constrained by the politics and the negotiations, but you heard David Plouffe. What in the end should be acceptable to the president at this point?
Well, obviously he wants to make sure that we don't see an extension of this debate for the next few months. We want to make sure it's taken care of. He obviously has said that we don't want to do further damage to the economy and that you have to have a balanced approach. But honestly, and listening to my colleague over here, not my colleague, but the colleagues of others in the House, and I appreciate being here with you, we are just talking past one another. And the reality is what has to happen is that I think the Tea Party members have to recognize that they read the tea leaves wrong in November, that people sent them here to change, but change the economy and not put us into default, not bad change, not exacerbate the problem, but change the economy by focusing on jobs. People were angry about the jobs. The Friday GDP results only inflates that. But now what they're doing is it is so irresponsible. So they need to, I believe the president will accept the deal as it's been outlined. Obviously, he's in the room and negotiating heavily. But in the end, what has to happen is that there must be a focus on jobs, and that's going to require some investment.
Let me just go back to Tom. Tom, you've been reporting on this as well in the last couple of days. The reality is that the president wanted tax increases. That's not going to be part of this. But the other reality is to get an increase in the debt ceiling, they are still going to leave unresolved some pretty tough questions about are there going to be Medicare cuts, Social Security cuts? What are you going to do about the big drivers of the debt?
Well, I think that's the critical issue, and I think everyone has to stand back and realize that we are where we are because we were all in. This is not just a Democratic problem or a Republican problem. The whole country was in on this to get us to this stage. We were in a huge spending binge in this country. Everybody was along for the ride for a long, long time. President Bush started a war on a credit card. It's been going on for 10 years. We have prescription drug benefits for the seniors that are not paid for. SEC wasn't looking at what was happening on Wall Street. Democrats were pushing house ownership for people who didn't really deserve and shouldn't be buying houses. At the same time, they were not willing to step up on reforming Medicare and on Medicaid and Social Security. The country itself, they were spending money like crazy, and they'd gotten used to having Washington take care of whatever they needed. So now we're at a stage where I think the country has to come together, David, and say this is a critical passage. And Democrats are going to have to step up on social entitlements and reforming them. I talked to Governor Kasich of Ohio yesterday, Republican, who's got his own tough passage out in Ohio. He was here in '97 as the chair of the House Budget Committee. He said we ought to be talking about reform and not just slashing spending. We ought to be reorganizing the government and these programs, because as we mismanage the expansion of government, we can't mismanage now the cutting of government. That's what I really think.
We're talking about recession. Okay, I have never felt since the 2008-2009 period that we'd be anything other than a growth mode coming out, like many of our trading partners, like China, like Brazil, like Russia, like India, not us. Now we are talking about a recession. This is the first time it's been on the table. This is a recession caused by government. It is not caused by business people. They want to build, they want to lend, they want to do anything possible to avoid this recession. The second half, we will be in recession if this is not resolved. Recession means many fewer jobs, means far fewer tax receipts, $1 trillion lost. IRA, 401k, $1 trillion lost in job creation. I'm hearing about little amounts being saved here versus what will be lost in the next 6 months if this is not resolved.
Congressman, you've talked about something that is fundamental to this impasse, and I want to show it on the screen because some polling indicates what Americans oppose and what they support. This is what Americans are for if you look at the numbers. A balanced budget amendment, which you supported. 3/4 of respondents. The cut, cap, and balance plan, which is what the House passed originally with spending caps and the like. But, oh, guess what? They're also for cuts and tax increases, that balanced approach. But here's what they're opposed to, which makes it hard. Cutting farm subsidies, cutting pensions, cutting Medicaid benefits, cutting Medicare, cutting Social Security. So the bottom line is the American people are sending mixed messages. It makes it hard to govern.
Absolutely. It makes it very hard to govern. They come into my office and they tell me, I want you to cut spending, but don't cut my program. Right. I hear that every single day. And the reality is that I want the American people to understand two things today. We will solve this problem. I'm tired of hearing all the media talking about how this is a crisis. We will solve this problem. It will actually happen. And today we will have a plan. It might not be a plan that I agree with, but I think today or tomorrow we will have a plan and we won't go past this date. The second thing, the Republicans actually proposed to get rid of all the loopholes already. And the people in the media never talk about it. The Ryan budget that was passed overwhelmingly by the House majority in the House actually has a plan for getting rid of the loopholes. I am for getting rid of the loopholes. I think it's fundamentally unfair that GE paid no taxes this year. And I think most of the American people agree with me. But what we need to do is we need to lower tax rates and we need to broaden the base so everyone gets treated equally.
Can I pin you down on one point?
Absolutely.
If your speaker supports the compromise that they're negotiating today, will you vote yes for it?
I have to look at it. I'm not sure.
But what has to be in it to get you to yes?
You know, for me, the balanced budget amendment is really important, but I think there's enough members of the House that will probably support it so it can pass. I think the votes are there, and that's really important.
The votes are there in the House. That's important. Because
I think the votes are there for it, because if the majority of the House have already voted for a similar plan.
Right.
I think the
but
votes
there'll be
are
no
there.
balanced budget amendment, which was a sweetener, which is how you got to 218.
But I think you will just lose a few votes, and I think it will get out of the House of Representatives.
Okay, so would the Tea Party caucus vote no, but it'll still survive?
You know, I'm not a member of the Tea Party caucus. I'm here to represent my constituents and the people of the United States.
Can I ask you a question about Idaho? I mean,
Yes.
here's an example. I've been looking at the numbers across the country about what states are the beneficiaries of federal aid. You're obviously a big beneficiary for a lot of reasons. You got national forest land. The last numbers I saw, you get $1.28 back for every dollar you send to Washington. Of that 28-cent premium, what would you be willing to give up? How much of it?
You know, if we got rid of that premium, what we would start doing is actually controlling our own destiny, and it costs us actually 30% more to use federal money. So I think it would be a wash. If you look at the schools, if you look at the roads, every time you do something with federal money because of the regulations and all the different things that you have to do, it actually costs you about 30% more too.
You know, it's interesting, Governor Graham, you had to balance a budget in Michigan. Not an easy process. Doesn't always make you a popular governor either in that process. But the Wall Street Journal did a look at the entitlement state that has been building since the 60s. And it's not a pretty picture. I mean, Republicans spent a lot of money on wars in the last decade and prescription drug benefit, but this has been going on since the 60s. The road to downgrade was this piece. By 2010, federal entitlement payments to individuals were 66% of the federal budget, up from 28% in 1965. We now spend $2.1 trillion a year on these redistribution programs, and the 75 million baby boomers only now starting to retire. And even if we have a compromise to get us out of this political mess right now and the short-term financial mess, we're not dealing with the fiscal problems here. They're still pushing that off because nobody in Washington can make those hard decisions.
I mean, clearly the entitlement question has to be addressed, but I can tell you, David, I cut more as a percentage out of government than any state in the country this past decade. And where is Michigan in terms of its economic growth? Cutting did not result in economic growth. What results in growth is making sure you've got a good business climate for businesses to grow and prosper. And so we've got to cut where we can in order to invest where we must in order to grow the economy. And it's that investment side that I worry that those who are affiliated with the Tea Party or who are on the far right don't realize that other countries are co-investing with businesses in order to create jobs in their countries. If we do nothing more than just cut, that will continue to accelerate the lack of growth in GDP. So we've got to realize that the strategy here must be very specific. Yes, you've got to reform entitlements, but you've got to reform entitlements and invest in order to grow, because the quickest way to take down your deficit is through growth.
But David, let's talk about the truth about what happened in Michigan. Governor Granholm actually supported the highest tax increases in the history of Michigan, and unemployment went from 6.8% to 15.3%.
When I took over Michigan, let's not get into an argument about Michigan.
Michigan
had
Let's
the
finish
highest
this point and then you respond.
And that's the reality. At the same time, you have the governor of Texas who actually supported tax decreases and more broadening of the base. And actually, we have the fastest growth in Texas than in any of the other states.
So this is a great point, because Michigan's economy is emblematic of what's going on in the nation. A global shift in manufacturing jobs. Michigan had 7 times more automotive manufacturing than other states in the country, and we saw those jobs leave because of this global shift. So the question for America is, what can our nation do to make sure we have advanced manufacturing jobs in our country? Yes, Michigan had a huge concentration of them, and that's, you know, we had the biggest bankruptcies in the world inside of Michigan. So clearly our unemployment rate was attached to that. But for the nation, we have to decide, how are we going to be competitive globally?
Let me ask Jim Cramer about the president's leadership in all of this. To show you how toxic this atmosphere is here, Peggy Noonan wrote in her piece in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend the following. about the president has supporters still, but there is grim support. She writes, Obama is losing a battle in which we had superior forces, the presidency, the U.S. Senate. In the process, he revealed that his foes have given him much too much mystique. He's not a devil, an alien, a socialist. He is a loser, and this is America where nobody loves a loser. Pretty strong language. From your vantage point, how is the president led through this?
All right, one of the things that happened, I want to talk about what Congressman said about the media, that the media exacerbate or even cause the problem. We were all hopeful in Wall Street and in Main Street that the president would come out and say a few things which said compromise. He came out and panicked the heck out of us. He talked about the higher interest rates for mortgages. He talked the spiking credit card. He talked about how hard it's going to be to get a student loan. It took us all aback because we felt that he'd be a compromise leader. Instead, he created tremendous fear. Tremendous fear means uncertainty. Uncertainty means no spending. Uncertainty means no spending by businesses. It means no hiring. It was a setback. He caused the panic, not the media.
But Tom, you covered Washington a long time. The reality is the president got very close to a deal, working it himself, and that blew up. He obviously took a different tack here.
He was working the deal with John Boehner. A lot of people thought they were going to get that done, the big grand deal, but the Speaker couldn't sell it in the House of Representatives. I think it's really kind of foolish to talk about winners and losers at this point. There are no winners that I see on this landscape at the moment, and we're going to have to kind of work our way through a very, very swampy piece of Washington real estate to see whether we can get to the high ground or not. But obviously, this has not been a great time for the president. It's not been a great time, especially for the Speaker. If the House does approve the Harry Reid bill, that'll be a little bit of a comeback. But if they reject in the House the Reid bill, then Speaker Boehner has had a really tough couple of weeks, to say nothing of the president at this point.
I'm sorry, but I have to disagree here. And with all due respect, in the House of Representatives, we actually passed a budget. We passed 2 bills that would have raised the debt ceiling. And I want to show you, this morning you actually saw on this show the failure of leadership of this administration. You asked David Plouffe a very simple question. Will the military be paid? Instead of telling you the truth, what he did is he demagogued. I want to show you real leadership. In 1985, the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, was asked the same question. And his Treasury Department said, the Secretary of the Treasury does have the authority to choose the order in which to pay obligations of the United States. This is an official document from the Department of Treasury. We are aware of no statute or any other basis for concluding that Treasury is required to pay outstanding obligations in order in which they are presented for payment unless it chooses to do so. And this president has not been willing to tell the American people that Medicare recipients and the military will be paid as long as we receive sufficient money in the Treasury. We have to solve this problem. I want to solve this problem. But there has been a failure of leadership from this president, and all he's doing is demagoguing and scaring the American people.
All right, well, let me take a break here. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back with more of our roundtable in just a moment.